So here's the question that I want to pose to you. What is the purpose of your company? If someone were to come up to you and say, what's the purpose of your business? How would you answer? Provide a software solution. Anybody else? What if they were to ask most of the people in your organization, what's the purpose of your business? Most people, when asked about the true purpose of their business, say that it's to make money. And what I'll tell you is if the purpose of your business is to make money, you have set yourself and your team up for mediocrity. And so that's what I want to center this talk on, is this big question. What's your purpose? Do you have one? Or are you just in the business of selling stuff? And I'm going to go ahead and give away the big idea right up front. And it's this. Salespeople who have a sense of purpose, who sell with what I call noble purpose, who truly want to make a difference to their customers, consistently drive more revenue than the salespeople who are focused on quota. This is not a theory. The data is absolutely clear. So I used to be a sales trainer for Procter & Gamble early in my career. And one of my colleagues there was a man named Jim Stengel. And he later went on to become the CMO of Procter & Gamble. And he's done some research on this. After he left Procter & Gamble, he commissioned a study. And it was a study of the Fortune 500 over the course of a 10-year period. And I don't know if you can see this chart here, but he identified 10 brands whose stated purpose was to make a difference in their customers' lives. 10 brands who pulled that all the way through their organization. And those 10 companies outperformed the S&P by almost 400% over a 10-year period. And it's kind of an ironic situation when you think about it, but the companies whose sole purpose wasn't to make money, the company whose sole purpose, whose singular purpose was to make a difference in the lives of their customers, outperformed their competitors. And it's an interesting world that we live in now, where the drive to make the quarterly number, the drive to meet the shareholder requirements, the drive to hit the quota for the month, often becomes the narrative of business. But when we allow that to happen, we cheat ourselves and our employees out of meaningful work, we cheat our customers out of the value that they might receive from us, and we ultimately cheat ourselves out of earnings. So I want to ask you a quick question. I want you to pretend, and you've all done this before, you're on the plane, you're in the elevator, you're sitting here, and someone says, what do you do for a living? And I want you to turn to the person next to you and answer that question. Don't think about it that much, just turn to the person next to you and answer the what do you do for a living question. Okay, now I just want you to remember that's your baseline. I want you to remember what that felt like, and I'm using the word feel very intentionally here. I want you to remember what that felt like to say it and what it felt like to hear it. Just remember that, and we're going to come back to that in a couple minutes. So I want to introduce you to this concept of noble sales purpose. I want to tell you the story about how I came to discover this. I run a consulting firm, and about 6 years ago, a large biotech company hired my firm to study their sales force. And we wanted to identify the thing that we always are searching for. What is the difference between the top performers and the good performers? So let me ask, how many people here are in a sales leadership capacity? Okay. When you go out in the field and you work with salespeople, it's probably pretty easy to discern the differences between the average performers and the poor performers, isn't it? You can see it. Now, we all know the difference when it comes to the numbers. When you look at the difference between the pretty good performers and the poor performers, customer knowledge, product knowledge, work habits, all those things. But the challenge for organizations is to distinguish what is the difference between those top-tier performers. What makes them absolutely amazing? And how can we duplicate those behaviors in the rest of the organization? So this was the challenge my team and I faced. And we went out in the field and we worked with reps all across the country. And we did a lot of the usual things where we watched, how long were they with the customer, how many questions did they ask. And I should tell you, this was a double-blind study. And by that I mean some of the reps that we were with were top-tier performers, and some were merely good performers. But we didn't know who was who. So we studied these salespeople, and we conducted extensive interviews. And one day, near the end of the study, I was out with a particular salesperson in Phoenix, Arizona. And I don't know, you all are in sales, have any of you made calls in Phoenix, Arizona in July? It's a great time to be in sales and to go in and out of about 10 or 15 doctor's offices. So it was one of those days where, you know, your shirt's kind of sticking to your back by about 8:30 in the morning. But for me, it ended up being a very exciting day because I was with a rock star. I was with one of those salespeople that you can just tell. From the moment she walked in the door, the customers paid attention. They looked at her, they were happy to see her, and you could just feel it. So at the end of the day, we had a little bit of time at the Phoenix airport. We're sitting in her car, and I thought, I'm going to get inside her head because I want to ask her a question I haven't asked any of the other salespeople that's not on our list. And so I said, what goes through your brain when you make sales calls? What are you thinking about? She kind of looked around the car like, this is a big secret. Now I'm really interested. She said, well, I don't tell this to many people, but I always think about this one patient. Now her company sold a drug that covered a variety of conditions, and some of them were quite debilitating. And she said, when I was first in this job, I was new in my territory, and I was standing in one of my doctor's offices. You know, and she's a pharma rep, so she's got her suit, her name badge on. And she said, this little old lady came up to me, and she tapped me on the shoulder. She said, excuse me, miss, are you the rep for this drug? And the sales rep said, yes, ma'am, I am. And the little old lady looked up at her and said, well, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for giving me my life back. Because prior to taking this, I couldn't travel, I couldn't do anything. After taking this drug, I can get on a plane and I can go visit my grandkids. I can sit down on the floor and play with them. So I want to thank you for giving me my life back. So she said to me, I think about that woman every single day. That's my purpose. She said, rainy Friday afternoon at 4:30, the other salespeople go home, not me, because I'm thinking about her. And so I got on the plane, headed back to Atlanta where I live, had a long flight, and I had a real opportunity to think about this. And I thought, in all this studying that we're doing of trying to unpack all of these behaviors and identify the difference between the top performers and the average performers, is this the thing that we've been missing, this internal narrative? So I went back and I looked at all the interviews looking for that sense of purpose. And at first I didn't see it. But then I dug a little deeper, and it was there in the salesperson that talked about how his dad had been a doctor, and he wanted to save doctors energy and time because his doctor's job was harder than anyone ever dreamed. It was there in the salesperson that talked about how they were so excited to share the science. And so I identified 5 salespeople across the country in all these interviews, 5 people that I thought had exhibited that sense of purpose. And at the end of the study, the biotech company asked us, who do you think our top performers were? And I said, these 5. I was 100% right. And that one rep who had talked about having this sense of noble purpose in her job was the #1 rep in the country for 3 years in a row. But you're not surprised, are you? Because we know the difference in our hearts when we show up on fire for making a difference for someone versus being just driven by quota. And so that single study with that company launched me on a quest because I wanted to see if this played out in other industries. That was 6 years ago. I've since spent 10,000 hours studying salespeople, and I can tell you it transcends industry, it transcends culture. The results are 100% clear beyond a shadow of a doubt. Salespeople who have this compelling sense of purpose, who sell with noble purpose, who are focused on making a difference to their customers, drive more revenue than salespeople who are focused on targets. But the interesting thing is, what do we talk about most in companies? Where is most of our energy? Where is most of our internal narrative? This is a good news, bad news situation, because this is an easy issue to fix. So I want to share with you a video. And this is a video from a client of mine. And let me go ahead here. Don't cue it up yet. I want to give you a little bit of background. This is the founder of an adventure travel company. And this adventure travel company had a particular challenge. They are so excited about what they do. They sell these trips that just change people's lives. But they had a challenge. They were dependent on resellers, travel agents. They still exist, by the way. Travel agents still exist in mass. And they were dependent on, I know, because you're thinking, who uses those? I go on Expedia. But travel agents still exist, and they particularly exist for this type of trip. And so the challenge that this organization faced was they had to go out and get these resellers to be as excited about their product as they were. And they compete in a world where everyone's got beautiful brochures and everyone can describe their trips so well. And so this is the founder. This is a guy named Bruce Poon-Tip. And he called me a couple months ago to help him with a sales transformation project because they were already a very successful brand, but they wanted to grow the revenue at a very rapid rate. And so if you could cue the video, I want you to hear what he has to say about what having a purpose has done for his organization. And after we watch this, I want to unpack what they did so that you can do it starting this afternoon. So go ahead and cue the video.
Well, most leaders are taught from school about profit and loss. I mean, that's what you learn in business school. When you're profitable, you're more successful. When you're more profitable, you're very successful. But I mean, that's not the only gauge to being successful in a modern company. With the transparency that exists today and the way people are engaging with brands, they want to know that the people that they're engaging with or the company they're investing their hard-earned money with is creating happiness. It's treating their people well, it's treating their customers well, because there's so much transparency now. I own the company, we're independent, and we've become the largest in our space in the world, but our competitors are huge holding companies. And very early on, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to outspend them, I had to outsmart them. The fact that we give people more passion, purpose, and happiness is really given us that laser focus that's united us all globally. It's transcended cultures, it transcends products, it transcends continents, and it's given us this laser focus and made us so powerful collectively.
So I want to share with you one of the things that we did. And first I want to ask a question. How many of you have ever been in a situation where you had to present right before or right after one of your competitors? Everybody been in the bake-off, or your salespeople have been in the bake-off? Yeah, that's what we used to call it, the bake-off. So this organization is in a spot where they have to do that, and they have to go up and they have to give presentations right before and right after their competitors at big conferences like this. So we said, we want to change the customer conversation. We had a really compelling purpose statement, a noble sales purpose. This company's noble sales purpose is they help other people discover more passion, purpose, and happiness. And what they recognized was it's not just about helping our users discover that, it's about helping our resellers discover that. So we reframed the entire sales conversation so that when they went forth and they followed 3 or 4 of their competitors who went up and said, well, our trip to this, our trip to this, our stuff's so cool, our stuff's so cool, they went up and the VP of sales stood on stage and said, I want to have a different conversation with you. I want to ask you why you got into this business. I want to ask you about the most beautiful sunset you've ever seen. I want to ask you about how it felt when you sent someone on an amazing trip and they sent you a thank you note. And they created an exercise where they did that. And they said, that feeling that you have right now, because we took a group of jaded travel agents who are all going, this is just going to be one more presentation, and we ignited a spark in their hearts. And he said, that feeling that you have right now is the feeling that I want you to have every single day. And at G Adventures, our job is to show up and help you create that. Now, how memorable do you think that presentation was compared to everybody else? They owned the room because they created a different conversation. And here's why. There's some brain science behind this. When you talk about qualitative data and you say we want to be #1 in the market and we want to grow by 20%, you end up with one part of people's brains being activated. But there's a deeper part of people's brains that's actually more powerful. You see, human beings have 2 fundamental needs. We want connection and we want meaning. We want to know that we make a difference. You just heard a presentation about across generations. This is a consistency across all generations. We want to know that we make a difference. So here's what I want you to do now. Before I asked you to describe what you did for a living, what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to think about a time when you made a difference to someone at work. Could be in this job, could be in a job 10 years ago when you made a difference to someone at work. Maybe it was a customer, maybe you stayed late with a colleague, maybe it was just an inspirational conversation, maybe you went the extra mile. Think about a time when you made a difference to a person at work and describe that to the person sitting next to you. Okay, make sure you've had a chance to switch. Okay. So last time I asked you to describe what you did for a living and just give the, hallway conversation. This time I ask you to describe a time when you made a difference to someone. Last time I asked you to pay attention to how it felt when you said it and how it felt when you heard it. Now what I'd like you to do is compare. How was this conversation different than the last conversation? Or did you notice a difference? What were the differences? Any? Passion? Emotion? How was it different when you heard it? How interesting was it compared to the previous time? Were you more engaged, less engaged? More? Some interesting things were happening, and I could observe this from where I was standing. I don't know if you noticed, but for the most part when I was looking at you, you all tended to lean in a little bit more. You were a little bit more animated. And some really important things were going on, because when you were describing how you made a difference to someone, and when the person next to you was listening to it, it's very likely that if we were to do a brain scan on an MRI, your frontal lobes would have lit up, because that's where empathy and compassion sits. Guess what else sits in your frontal lobes when you activate them? Problem solving and creativity. So in that moment when you were describing how you made a difference to someone, you weren't just operating at that rote level. You had a feeling, and the feeling enabled you to be more creative. You would be a better problem solver, and it got the other person more engaged. That's what you want to ignite in your salespeople every single day. That kind of feeling is why that video I just showed you with the founder of G Adventures, why their sales are up 35% every month since we started doing this. Okay? If you're interested in how we did it, I can give you more specifics. I wrote about it for Forbes, and I can send you a copy of the article. And I unpack exactly what we did with that organization. But in the time that we have left, I want to give you some things that you can do right now to create that sort of feeling in your sales force and to use it to drive revenue. Okay? We've all seen the data. 70% of people are disengaged. I'm sure you've flown on a plane where the flight attendants were disengaged. I'm sure you've checked in somewhere where the people were disengaged. And you've probably seen it in your own office. And if we're all honest with ourselves, we've probably all had days like that where we were going through the motions. We need to stop that problem. And we're not going to stop it by putting quotas in front of people. Numbers are important, but what I would suggest to you is many of the critiques about people being disengaged are because we haven't given anything to them, anything to care about. Because the internal talk track drives the external behavior. I spent my previous life in sales training before I founded this company, and one of the things that I was continually disappointed in was when we would teach people these behaviors, and you're gonna ask this question, you're gonna ask impact questions, you're gonna ask high gain questions. I taught every single one of those courses. And we would teach these people how to do these things, but then they'd go out in the customer and they either wouldn't do it or they'd do it in a really rote way, because what we often failed to address was the internal talk track. Here's the bottom line. If you treat your customers like a number, they will return the favor. If your internal conversation is all about collecting revenue from the customers, you are in grave danger of being commoditized. And one need look no further than the auto industry to see what happens when you treat your customers like a number. It is absolutely amazing to me. The automotive industry has genius engineers. Their product development has been amazing in the last years. They have great marketing. The distribution is there. But what happens? Everything is about the consumer. It's about what kind of cars do we need? How can we market? I watch these ads. I feel younger and sexier. All I have to do is buy this car. It's going to be awesome. But what happens in all that customer-focused behavior when you show up on the showroom floor? It all falls apart. And why is that? Because that salesperson, for the most part, isn't thinking about you. They're thinking about the number. And the reason they're thinking about the number is because that's what their manager told them to care about. Has anybody ever been to a sales meeting or seen a sales meeting in a car dealership? Okay, yeah, I've seen a few. And I've never been to a sales meeting at a car dealership where they said, let's talk about how we can get people into safer transportation. Let's talk about how we can make that middle-aged woman feel sexier. Let's talk about how we can get that guy to work in reliable transportation. They never say that. What do they say? Make the number. And it's really just an exaggerated version of what's happening in a lot of sales organizations. So I want to talk to you a little bit about language. I've got 8 minutes and 36 seconds left. And I want to talk to you about language. I want to tell you a story. I was up for a big consulting project. It was a sales transformation project. And I was going in, and it was one of those bake-offs, and I was following my competitor. And I happened to hear a little hallway conversation that led me to realize that I was just being called in for show. They already wanted the other guy, but they wanted to be able to tell the CEO, you know, we looked at 2 companies. And so you know how you get to that moment where you have nothing to lose anymore? And you just kind of lose all your filters? So I'd already bought my plane ticket to Buffalo. I'm waiting in the lobby. I already know I'm not getting this thing, so go for it. So the other guy, the other consultant was in there, and his whole big thing was, I'm going to help you hunt down these sales because you want more hunters, and we're going to bag these deals. And I could tell, you know, he's talking about this, and everybody's getting all jacked up about it. And so I go in and I say, you know, wow, you guys are going to hunt some sales. You're going to get that customer in your sights, nail them. And they're thinking, you're like a terrible consultant because you're like talking about what the other guy said. And I said, you know, I talk about noble purpose and how you can really, you know, connect with your customers. And I'm sure that thinking about, you know, hunting them down and bagging the deal is really exciting to you. And again, they're thinking, she's like terrible. She's talking about the other guy. And so I said, well, I just want to ask you one question. You can talk about hunting your customers, turning your salespeople into hunters, or you can do it my way. You can talk about really showing up and getting passionate customers and being emotionally engaged, and that your noble purpose is to serve your customers. So I just want to ask you one question. If your 3 biggest customers were here in the room, who would they want you to pick? The guy that's going to hunt them down, or me? And I got it. And it's one of the things we've got to be careful about in sales is the language that we use. Because the language you use to define your customers, to talk about your customers, creates the narrative for your business. It's not just the leadership language. It's what are you looking at on your CRM? When your sales rep opens that, what do they see? A pipeline of how they're going to collect the revenue? Or do they see what the customer's goals are? You know, there's a lot of things that you can do that contribute to a customer-driven narrative, but there's a lot of things, unfortunately, that we do that erode it. Because what we're really trying to do is that feeling that you had when you described making a difference to someone, that's the feeling that we want our salespeople to have about their customers. Because you can tell the difference, can't you? When I described those scenarios, you know the difference. You see it in your behavior as a consumer, and it shows up in a B2B situation. I have yet to encounter a company that had passionate, engaged, raving customers that did not also have passionate and engaged and raving employees, because that's where it starts. So here's what I want you to do. Here's your assignment, and this will make a difference to you and to your team. I want you to think about what your noble sales purpose is. And a noble sales purpose answers 3 questions. 1, how do you make a difference to your customers? How do you affect your customers? Number 2, how are you different than your competitors? And number 3, on your best day, what do you love about your job? If you come see me afterwards, I'll give you some examples of companies that we've worked with that have created noble sales purpose statements. One of them is the Orange County court system. And their noble purpose is, we unlock the wheels of justice. Another company we worked with is in the construction software management company here in the Valley. Their noble sales purpose is, we help people build a better world. It doesn't have to be complicated, but until you get, like he talked about in that video, that laser-like focus on how you make a difference to customers, if you don't have that, your employees have nothing to gravitate to during times of difficulty, during challenging sales situations. So here's what it takes. We call it the NSP, the Noble Sales Purpose Advantage. It takes leadership, and there's a really clear narrative around this. It takes reinforcement. What are you doing with your CRMs? What are you doing with your coaching? You know, one of the descriptors in my talks that I'm going to share with you, the one question you can ask. I'm going to tell you what that is right now. Think about when you coach a salesperson. What are the questions most managers ask before a salesperson goes in to close a big deal or when you're talking about an opportunity? What do we ask? When are you going to close it? How much is it? Who's the competition? Are you talking to the decision makers? Does that kind of cover it? Those are all excellent questions. But there's one more you need to ask every salesperson before they go into the big call. How is this customer going to be different as the result of doing business with us? It's the single question that will shift them from that quota mindset to a compelling customer narrative. Because if they can't answer that question for you, they're not going to be able to answer it for the customer. So that's the big question. Ask it in meetings, ask it in coaching scenarios. How will this customer be different as a result of doing business with us? Because that's how you create a culture filled with noble purpose. So my company is McLeod & Moore, and we have a noble purpose. We help leaders drive revenue and do work that makes them proud. And I'll tell you why there's two parts to that. Revenue is important. And I've run a company that wasn't doing well. And I have been that leader who lied in bed on Thursday night with their heart pounding, staring at the ceiling, not be able to sleep because she didn't know how she was going to make payroll on Friday. I have been that person, and that is not fun. Driving revenue is critical because when you're worried about not making money, you don't make good decisions. When you're coming from that place of fear, you don't make good decisions. You're not a good leader. You're frantic. So we help leaders drive revenue. We also help leaders do work that makes them proud. Because I've been in different kinds of jobs in my life. I've been in those jobs where the clock went off Monday morning and you went, oh God, and you went through the motions. And I've also been in those jobs, like I'm in now, where you wake up on fire for what you do. When people are passionate, when they're on fire for what they do, they're not just better at work, they're better everywhere. They're better parents, they're better spouses, they're better citizens. We want to make a difference in our jobs. We spend enough time there, it ought to matter. So if you're interested in these kinds of results, come see me, I'll be here for the rest of the day. And the last thing I want to close with is a story. I have a friend who works in politics, and she's run a couple of big campaigns. And it's easy to get disgusted with it. We were talking about it one day, and she said, you know, here's the thing. In every office, there's always a TB. I said, what's a TB? She said, a TB is a true believer. They're that starry-eyed optimist who still believes that they can make a difference. She said, but here's the thing all the jaded staffers don't tell you. Everybody in that office is secretly jealous of the true believer. Now, I've worked with sales organizations for 20 years, and here's what I've come to recognize. There is a true believer that lurks in the heart of every salesperson and every leader. Because as much as salespeople want to make money, they also want to make a difference. And when you can tap into that, when you can tap in to that internal drive and you can align an organization around that, your people will move mountains for you. You deserve to make money and do work that matters. Thank you.